love you. Excuse me.
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
Alright everyone, and welcome back to Cody and Joey Reviews. I'm Cody.
And I'm Joey.
Alright, and today we are finishing off our Star Wars reviews with the Star Wars prequels, which include Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. Now, these movies are notorious for being really bad, but we decided to give them their fair due in court, and we're gonna basically, I guess, rip right into it.
Yeah.
General thoughts up front. I'm not a huge fan of these prequels. Of course, I grew up on these movies. I was born in '92, so by the time Phantom Menace came out, I was 7 years old already, and I of course, went to the theaters to see these movies. At the time, as a kid, I've loved them, but since, you know, I've grown up and sort of moved away from Star Wars, I've kind of backed away from them. How do you feel about the prequels?
Yeah, like, The Phantom Menace was, like, my first, like, official introduction to Star Wars, so I watched it in theaters in 1999 with my family. You know, and, like, when I watched it, I thought it was a pretty good film. I mean, I was so sad with, you know, Qui-Gon's scene at the end and all that. I mean, and, like, I really felt for the characters. But, of course, like, being much younger, like, I didn't have much of, like, a critique for movies. So as time went on, and then after seeing the original trilogy, I could see where the hatred for these prequels come in. Because the original trilogy had characters that you could relate to. It had, like legitimate story arc. You had character development. And, I mean, these are, like, you know, staples of a movie. The prequels didn't really have that. I mean, maybe up until Episode 3, because I actually do consider Episode 3, like, to be, like, a really good movie. I know that a lot of people still criticize it, because it's kind of still, like, along the lines of the mistakes that were made with the prequels. But Attack of the Clones, I thought was also really weak as well. I mean, there's just so many, like, horrendous scenes with Anakin talking about sand with Padme. But, you know, it's like there almost is, like, a value to going back and then, you know, laughing about these films with friends and kind of making fun of them. But, yeah, so...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Phantom Menace as a kid was one of my all-time favorite Star Wars films. I mean, the pod race scene, of course, you know, as a kid... I just only paid attention to the action scenes, the dialogue scenes in between, I didn't really care about, but the pod racing, the lightsaber fight at the end, and we'll talk about it in a minute, Jar Jar, kept my interest with Episode 1. I did actually, back when they re-released this in 2012, you and I actually went to the theater to see it. It was the first time I had seen it in years, and I was just... Yeah. I was cringing the entire time, because all of a sudden I was paying attention to plot, characters... all that, and this movie is very dry. It's boring. The dialogue, they talk about tax negotiations and debates. It's like, that's not what we want from a Star Wars film. Star Wars is supposed to be about the mythical, the Force binding us together, rebels against the Empire sort of thing. So when you have a 2.5-hour movie, or close to 2.5 hours, where it's nothing but political debates and all that, yeah, I'm not going to be interested in this movie.
I agree. And like, if you compare, like, the opening crawl for Episode 1, 2, and 3 to, like, the original trilogy and even, like, The Force Awakens, I mean, like, the prequels talk about, like, taxation, trade routes. I mean, ridiculous stuff that nobody cares about. I mean...
No, not at all.
And, like, these movies are, like, supposed to kind of set up, you know, Anakin Skywalker and, like, you know, like, turning into, like, Darth Vader, but we don't, like... that, like, opening crawl doesn't, I mean, it kind of, like, warns us, like, what to expect, and it's just really hard to be interested in the plot line, just because, like, we don't care about these political things, and it's almost watching, like, a science fiction version of C-SPAN. Now, like, given, I mean, whenever, like, we did watch it again in, like, 2012, I mean, the lightsaber battle still holds up.
Oh, definitely.
Darth Maul is such a cool villain, even though I think he only has, like, 3 lines in the movie, but that, like, last lightsaber scene, I mean, like, that, like, lightsaber, like, battle at the end, I thought was great. I mean, and, like, even if it was choreographed, I still rank it as, like, one of the best lightsaber battles in the entire saga.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you talk about these films having to be built up, Anakin turned to the dark side, the downfall of the hero. Here is my biggest problem with these prequels. George Lucas likes to do something called jazz riffing. If you don't know what that is, basically when jazz singers go up on stage, sometimes they don't know where a song's going, so they just kind of riff and let the song kind of evolve that way. But George Lucas is a huge fan. If he doesn't know what the plot is needed at the time, he'll just do whatever. I mean, that's why we have a 30-minute pod race scene in episode 1. That's why Jar Jar's doing nonsensical things. I mean, this whole prequel trilogy, it should be the build-up and fall of our hero Anakin, but there's so much time wasted in these prequels to nonsensical stuff, things that don't matter, that by the time we get to episode 3, which I too think is still a pretty good movie, not one of the best, but definitely up there, everything's crammed into that movie because George Lucas wasted so much time with the other 2 movies that episode 3 kind of feels forced and rushed, and you don't feel like the build-up to Anakin turning over to the dark side was believable at all.
Right, and I feel like with like episode 3 being rushed, that kind of like had to, you know, like retroactively change like what was true, because he had to get, you know, Luke and Leia to be born, but like Leia only sees like, you know, like her mother maybe for like 3 seconds, you know, and of course when you're like just born, you don't remember anything.
No,
and then you know, and like episode 6, Leia says that like she remembers her mother and she has, you know, feelings and all this stuff. So I thought that was kind of like a big plot hole there. And how like Obi-Wan says that he never like remembered owning a droid, even though R2-D2 was part of like, you know, the prequel trilogy. And then, you know, even Obi-Wan had his own droid R4. So those were kind of, you know, random things that I could complain about. And like I did like the ending of episode 3 just because it really kind of felt like the series kind of went full circle. It ended where it began in, you know, Tatooine with like the binary sunset and all that. But I agree. I think like episode 1 and 2 wasted so much time. And like if you were to kind of look at like the plot lines of these stories, I think that like they could have worked, but it's just you had to get like, I think George Lucas should have like collaborated with other people. There's a video on YouTube where like I think like people are trying to give him, you know, feedback on like the script and the pacing, and he doesn't listen to them. He thinks that he knows better. And I think after getting all that power from the original 3 movies, he kind of thought that he was like indestructible, which he wasn't. But yeah, and I mean, whenever you're ready to talk about like Jar Jar Binks, I'm ready.
Oh my goodness. Okay, here we go. As a kid, I really did like Jar Jar Binks. I thought he was funny. He was so animated. He kept my attention in between those boring dialogue scenes like I talk about. But my God, when we saw this back in 2012, the entire time Jar Jar Binks was on screen, I wanted him to shut the fuck up. He wouldn't stop moving around. Everything he said was completely just idiotic. I can't believe George Lucas thought this was even a good introduction to a character at all. Yeah. I don't know why he chose to do it this way. And so not because of anything racist, you know, racist or anything. I don't think Jar Jar is a racist parable to anything, but I agree. The character is just so unnecessary. Doesn't even do really anything in the whole prequel trilogy. He has such a prominent role in episode 1, and George Lucas luckily toned it down for the other 2. Yeah. But my God, I mean, I know a lot of people complain about this character, and deservedly so. This character deserves all the hate that it deserves. It's really the worst character ever created.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, like, watching a movie in 1999, it's like, okay, Jar Jar Binks was funny, he was cute, you know, and all that. But it's like, when you watch it later, you know, in 2012, you really see that, like, you cannot make a comic relief character, like, the central plot point. I mean, he moves the plot along, unfortunately. And I mean, George Lucas even claimed back then that Jar Jar was, like, key to the plot line. And it's actually funny. There's these theories about Jar Jar being, like, the Sith Lord, which are actually pretty good if you read them.
Oh my God, no. That's ridiculous. No! So, I will not accept that ever.
But yeah, I mean, Jar Jar Binks is such a ridiculous character, and I just think it's almost like the Hangover series, how like they used like Leslie Chow too much in the films, and it's
too
like
much.
You know, and it just ended up being like not enjoyable. With this character, of course, it is a little bit different, and he's by far the worst character in the entire saga. And I mean, I guess there is kind of like a fun value of like making fun of him, but it doesn't work if you're trying to watch good. Like,
no, definitely not. Even the CGI holds up anymore. I mean, in this day and age, when we have movies like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, like Life of Pi, Avatar, where CGI has really come far, you know, advanced. Even in the original Lord of the Rings movies, the CGI in that was really good. You'll go back and see this movie, and for the time, it was really good. But you watch it now, and it's like, it feels cartoonish. It doesn't feel like it's really there. And I I can't wrap my mind around Jar Jar Binks. It's just,
Yeah.
I hate him. I'm glad he wasn't in The Force Awakens. I'm glad there was no reference to him.
Yeah.
I know a lot of fans, for some weird reason, wanted him in Episode 7. I even read an article online that was like, sorry, Star Wars fans, but Jar Jar's not going to be in Episode 7. I was like, no, that's a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
You don't want this character in here.
Yeah, like, and The Force Awakens really didn't even reference the prequels that much. I mean, like, the Clone Army was referenced, like, once, but otherwise, I mean, this just feels like there was only, like, 4 Star Wars films. The original trilogy, then, like, The Force Awakens when you watch that one. But, yeah, I guess with the prequel trilogy, it's just, I think overall it's just like a really rushed mess. And I think George Lucas is just trying to, finish off the saga, trying to do 3 movies within, 6 or 7 years. And it doesn't work for me. I do like Revenge of the Sith, but the ending just kind of feels a little too shoehorned. Except, I mean, like the very, very final scene, which I loved quite a bit. And I think another major criticism about these movies is like most of the lightsaber battles, except for like the Phantom Menaces, are just like too choreographed, and they don't look like there's any emotion involved in them. With Anakin versus Obi-Wan in Episode 3, they just like overdid the fight, and I couldn't feel much emotion when you got to like the 10-minute mark of them still clashing each other with lightsabers and like the lava and hanging off of stuff. It was just crazy.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to reflect on what you said. This trilogy is just a mess. I mean, George Lucas should have spent more time trying to build up Anakin turning over to the dark side. I feel like that's what these 3 movies should have been about. That's not what they're about, and that's very disappointing. So when we get to Episode 3, yeah, it's kind of devoid of the emotion, the strength that it really needs. Mm-hmm. Although counterpoint to you, I really like the Anakin versus Obi-Wan stuff. Just to give credit to Ewan McGregor, he's like the best actor in the entire trilogy. Yeah. He gives those scenes weight, whereas Hayden Christensen, he can kind of look menacing, but he's not bringing the weight and the depths that the character needs. But yeah, this trilogy is kind of a mess, and even Episode 3, which I really like, is just way too rushed, and the explanation for Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader is shoehorned in at best. I mean,
and I feel his death. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, definitely. Like, I can't believe that George Lucas thought that this was worthy. I mean, he went back and changed everything about the originals. These 3 movies are the least changed of any Star Wars film, whereas I'm sitting over here thinking that they need to be the most changed. But definitely, it doesn't work for me anymore. I haven't watched the prequel trilogy in quite a while. I watched it for Episode 7's release, but it's not one that I go back and rewatch all that often. I will go back and rewatch the originals. These ones I can entirely skip. Yeah. Completely.
And like with like the original trilogy, I mean, like with like millions of others, I mean, you can almost like remember every single line whenever like it's about to come up. And it's like with like the prequel trilogy, like, I don't remember any of the lines. So that just kind of shows like the disconnection that we have to those. And if I were to rate each one individually, I'd probably rate The Phantom Menace a 2 out of 5. Attack of the Clones also a 2 out of 5. And then Revenge of the Sith a 3.5 out of 5.
See, you're a bit more generous than I am. Episode 1, if I'm going to rate these individually, Episode 1 I'd give 1.5 out of 5 stars. Just so much time wasted, very boring, with a nonsensical character thrown in there just to keep our attentions. That doesn't even work. And what is it? It's a build-up to an 8-minute lightsaber fight. Well, as cool as it is not enough to make up for the other 2 hours of the film.
You're right.
Attack of the Clones is my least favorite Star Wars film. Admittedly, I haven't watched the Clone Wars. I'm never gonna watch the Clone Wars. But it's my least favorite. I'm gonna give it 1 out of 5 stars. Just the whole that movie relies on the relationship between Padme and Anakin, and it just falls flat due to poor writing and poor acting from Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen. So, weakest one. Episode 3 I'm going to be a bit kinder on. I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's got good action. I think that the characters work a little bit better in that movie. Hayden Christensen gives a slightly better performance than he did in Episode 2. And, of course, Ewan McGregor and Ian McDiarmid, they're the best things to come out of these prequel trilogies. Yeah. Also Liam Neeson, but he's not in this movie. But 3.5 out of 5 stars for Revenge of the Sith. I still think it's a pretty decent movie, and that one I have gone back and rewatched quite a few times. I won't go back to it as much as the original trilogy or Episode 7, but definitely 3.5 out of 5. But if I were to rate this whole trilogy together, I would give it probably just 1 out of 5 stars. It just failed to do what it was supposed to do, which was give us the fall of a hero, and it ends up just falling flat entirely.
I agree with you. I mean, like, when looking at it from that perspective, I mean, like, the goal of the prequel trilogy was to show us Anakin as, like, you know, like, such a great pilot and, like, such a great friend to Obi-Wan, kind of going down the path of the dark side, being seduced and becoming Darth Vader. It doesn't work in that regard, and I think rating the overall trilogy, I might be like a little kinder, but I mean, you know, a 2 out of 5 stars for the whole trilogy really is not saying much. I mean, it's just not a good trilogy.
No, doesn't even live up to the original or this newer one that came out.
Oh yeah, The Force Awakens kills
definitely.
the prequels.
Did you hear about George Lucas? He doesn't like Episode 7.
I heard about.
Oh my god.
I mean, yeah.
I think it's mainly because he wrote a draft for Episode 7 that Disney was like, no.
And then they didn't take it.
Yeah, they just threw it completely out.
I mean, he sold the franchise. What do you expect? I mean,
yeah, he needs to shut up, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for joining us with Cody and Joey Reviews.
And stay tuned.